Well then, let's tackle this beast. Probably the most requested complete history since the beginning. Well, apart from Final Fantasy and Zelda, that is. I mean, come on guys, seriously? Today, I'm going to be looking back at the game that got me hooked and took me back to my platforming roots, probably more than any other during the 90s PlayStation takeover. Nope, not this one. This one and this one. Nintendo had Mario, Sega sort of had Sonic, and us sweaty-palmed, hot-blooded teenage lads had Lara Croft. Sorry, what was I saying? Look, we'll undress Lara another time. But for now, it's all about the Bandicoots of 1996, leading all the way up to the recent re-release HD remasters of 2017. 21 years of mostly pure, awesome gameplay filled into a short documentary style video for your water-filled, nostalgia-injected eye sockets. So, let's not hang about and look into the Crash Bandicoot franchise, the development, the game's origins, the jump from console to console, and of course, the games. Welcome to Slope's Game Room. Video game characters can literally come from anywhere. But luckily for Naughty Dog, Sega hadn't turned Bandicoots into the latest sidekick character yet for the Sonic the Hedgehog universe. So it was ripe for the taking. Would you look at this? We have come a hell of a long way. What an amazing opportunity new gamers have to boot up the PlayStation 4 and experience the phenomenon that is Crash Bandicoot at his very best. Minus the kart racer. But actually, to fully understand everything from Skylanders DLC to Mario Kart clones, we need to stop looking at the sexy ass 2017 footage because I think we're in fact getting a little ahead of ourselves. So, let's go back to the beginning. Here we have Andrew Gavin and Jason Rubin, the duo behind Naughty Dog. What, don't recognise the logo? Well, before the blockbuster days of The Last of Us, Uncharted, Jak and Dexter, and of course Crash Bandicoot, these boys at the tender age of 16, might I add, in 1984 founded this very small independent video game developing company, whilst they were still at school. And what legendary blockbuster of a game did they start on that eventually made way to some of the greatest games ever made? Why, Math Jam, of course. Come on, you knew where I was going with that. Well, if we're going to get technical, Math Jam was actually made under the name Jam Software, which was a fusion of the guys' names, Jason, Andrew, and Magic. And let's be honest, this isn't really a game. It's some old school throwaway education action that only the likes of LGR would really get a kick out of. The Naughty Dog name actually started with these two titles, Keith the Thief and Rings of Power. Yeah, go and play them if you really want. Hashtag not for me. And reviewers thought so too, getting average scores at best. However, the tides would sort of change in 1994 when the company put out Way of the Warrior for the 3DO. This was actually a little bit better. Although it controlled like absolute arse, the graphics were actually quite extraordinary for the time, which is quite surprising because the company was basically bankrupt by this point, and was actually filming the sequences using friends rather than real martial art actors and stuntmen. Plus, due to the duo being so bloody skint, they filmed those sequences at home with a yellow screen taped to their own wall. But due to the size of their apartment being so small, they had to move the filming of the so-called actors into the hallway, which resulted in many neighbours actually thinking that they were filming some weird porno. No joke. Either way, the game was eventually finished, it was sent to several different publishers, and it was Mark Cerny at Universal Interactive Studios, yes, that guy that keeps popping up at E3, that saw the potential of the game and decided to take the company on and contracted them to make an extra 3 games. At this point, Naughty Dog had moved from Boston to LA and had their own office to work on both Way of the Warrior and, more importantly, those upcoming 3 games that Mark had requested. During that 3-day office move journey, the duo had plenty of time to talk about what the next game could be, and the thought process went a little like this. With the recent jump to 3D games from 2D, the genres that we're starting to see at home the most are racing, shooting, and fighting. And although games like this are obviously not as good as games like this, 2D pixelated games are quickly becoming old news. So, let's try and do the same for the platform action genre too. They eventually came up with the idea of a game that at first they called Sonic's Arse. I'm serious. You see, it was a simpler time then. No 3D Sonic games were out yet to tarnish his good name, and the duo wondered what a platform game with the perspective twisted behind the main character constantly looking at Sonic's arse would actually be like. If only these guys weren't for Sega, we wouldn't have had to see so many trials and errors before we got a game like this. But anyway, back to their journey. So the guys still had 2 days left of their journey to perfect that Sonic's Arse idea, and eventually they proposed the idea for the new game to Mark, and he accepted, and the seed of Crash Bandicoot was finally set. Now the decision for what systems to put it on was also pretty simple. The 3DO was basically dead at this point, as was the 32X and Jaguar. The Saturn development kit was hard as hell, and that obviously left the PlayStation. Now the PlayStation also had another fairly important attraction. You see, Sega had Sonic and Nintendo had the Olympic winning fat guy. And if they released it on one of these, the best they could ever get is second place. Now PlayStation on the other hand didn't have a mascot, and the duo wanted to change that. And change that they did, with Willy the Wombat. No, not that one. Yet before the days of Crash you had Willy the Wombat. The team knew they wanted to mimic a cutesy real human-like animal that not too many people was aware of. Again, just like the majority of the Sonic universe. So they went out to buy a book on Tasmanian mammals. And it was wombats and bandicoots that came to the top of the list. Anyway, we'll continue with Willy shortly. For now, let's move on. It was at a local Italian restaurant that the team came up with the idea of the villain. They needed someone that was adaptable and could easily run throughout the whole series. Sort of like Robotnik. He obviously needed to be brainy, hence the big head, comical, and always kicking off at his own henchmen. Sprinkling a big pinch of brain from Pinky and the Brain, as well as the weasels from Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and Dr. Neo Cortex was born. Now the reason I mention this and jump over the evolution of Willy or Crash is because Dr. Neo Cortex came in first. In fact, they were still unsure of the name of the main character, and even after Sony had greenlit the game for their systems, on the way to E3 they still wasn't sure of the name. The marketing people over at Naughty Dog were pushing for things like Wuzzles, Wes, and Wizzy the Wombat, but the team didn't like these suggestions, and thanks to the character's constant smash of crates, they narrowed it down to Dash, Smash, Bash, or Crash. And although this angered the marketing guys so much that they threatened to leave the company if they went with one of these names, they did it anyway. And finally the Wombat turned into Bandicoot and got the iconic name Crash Bandicoot. As the game was being made by Naughty Dog, published by Universal Interactive Studios, and then eventually released onto Sony's consoles, the middlemen actually wanted to push that game at that year's E3 as their very own game, with practically no mention of Naughty Dog at all. In fact, Naughty Dog wasn't even invited, and on top of this, the proposed artwork shown didn't even have the company's Naughty Dog logo on there anywhere. It sucks, I know, and the duo wasn't going to take this, and in retaliation ended up printing a crazy 1,000 leaflets with the words Naughty Dog, creator and developer of Crash Bandicoot, and then passed them around outside the building to people going into E3. Sure, this wound up Universal's top dogs, but they did it anyway, and you know what? Fair play to them. Anyway, the game was indeed the showstopper that Naughty Dog and I'm sure Universal had hoped for, and on September 9th, 1996 in North America, November the 2nd, 1996 in Europe, and finally December 6th, 1996 in Japan, the game was finally released to the public. Let's take a look, shall we?
Dr. Cortex is a genius, a mental aberration. He's totally fixated on world domination. The local island creatures are dull and obtuse. Until the evil doctor turns on his juice, he wants them for his troops. They come out nincompoops, most especially Crash Bandicoot. Should have been a genius, but he doesn't quite compute. Crash Bandicoot. Anything can happen now that Crash is in pursuit.
What you are seeing here is the original intro to the game. Although it only surfaced onto the tubes in 1998 and it's not 100% clear what exactly it was intended for beyond being the opening cutscene for the game, the most important thing to note here is that this Saturday morning style cartoon show just shows how far the gaming public was being pressured to leave 2D behind in favour of the polygon generation. As Top Hat Gaming puts it, 1 step forward and 2 steps back.
But Dr. Cortex, we have not determined the cause of past failures. Moron! This Bandicoot will be my general, and he will lead my Cortex commandos to world domination. This time I shall reign triumphant.
Sony, as much as they liked the look of the intro, dropped it in favour of this. I mean, come on, this is the bloody PlayStation 1, not a blooming Mega CD, am I right? So now you know about the Sonic's arse game design? You know what? It all makes sense. This was something completely unique. At the same time, you had Mario 64 and Bubsy. And honestly, I don't think you can compare this game to either of those games. It's very different. Whereas both of those titles let you control your character in a 3D world, Crash Bandicoot felt more like a 3D driving game turned into a platformer. Well, that's how I see it anyway. Let those juggernauts fight it out with a million other 3D platformers fighting for that top spot. Crash Bandicoot is something fantastically special that not many other games have attempted to replicate. Now, honestly, reviewing the original 21 years after it came out and sort of revolutionised gaming with its new playstyle, you quickly realise it's very dated. And honestly, is 100% a product of its time. And although it's far more enjoyable to play the insane remake, which we'll get to in a bit, for me and most other gamers, Crash Bandicoot didn't hit its stride until the second and third game. But while we're here, the story goes like this. Crash Bandicoot has been mutated by the evil Dr. Neo Cortex using his Evolvo Ray, in an attempt to turn several Tasmanian-type species into an evil army of henchmen that can take out all of those naysayers that don't believe in his work. The experiment goes wrong, Crash escapes, and is on a mission to save Torna, another far more sexier Bandicoot that Crash had grown fond of during their time in captivity. Oh yes, and by the way, she was influenced by none other than Jessica Rabbit. Just like most platformers, it starts on an upbeat, brightly coloured level and then quickly hits all the usual zones on the way to the main bad guy. The gameplay is slightly unforgiving and has difficulty spikes that literally come out of the blue. But in all honesty, I welcome the challenge. This can be quite a hard 3D platformer at times, and as I am a big fan of this genre as a whole, that's nothing but a good thing. There is just something special with this game, and although that might just be nostalgia, as I saw one of the first influences of 2D to 3D doing it better than I could have ever imagined, infused with the middle finger radical attitude that Crash Bandicoot had in adverts against Nintendo, which by the way I was still not a big fan of in this young brainwashed point of my life, it all came together and made me love the game, and more importantly, Crash Bandicoot as a whole. I bloody loved this guy. Would you look at his lovely wacky face. In fact, one of the main reasons there are these more hardcore levels when Crash is running towards you is because the team wanted you to see his face, not just his arse. The team wanted you to remember this character, and they obviously did that, even letting him become the official mascot for bloody Pizza Hut at one point.
Turn the pizza around! It's stuffed crust, you eat it backwards! Carry on!
There was just so much research that went into what makes a great video game mascot likeable, and that's also why he didn't have a voice, you know, to help him become more relatable. This was pushed even further when the team had to heavily study Japanese anime culture to try and make the game work over there too, which it also did. Not only is it the 10th best selling game for the system as a whole outside of Japan, it's also the first non-Japanese made game for the system to hit gold in the land of the rising sun, even resulting in him getting a short-lived manga series, can you believe it? Now, let's get a little controversial. Although this, Mario 64, is obviously a better game than this, Crash Bandicoot, dare I say anything bloody different on this platform, I would actually argue that Crash Bandicoot looks better. And there goes the sub count. But it's true. To this very day I believe Crash still looks good for an early polygon rendering system. It's such a brightly coloured, popping with awesome visuals game, and this is all due to the fantastic efforts put forward by the Naughty Dog team. For instance, remember when PS1 games, mainly early driving ones, actually built the tracks right in front of you? Well, the same was gonna happen for Crash originally, and that's why even though you're running away or towards the screen, it's never in a straight path. And that's why you constantly find yourself slightly going over hills, up hills, slightly to the left, slightly to the right. All of this was in an attempt to make sure you cannot see too far in front of you. It might seem like a cop-out, but in my opinion, this is development done right, using the system's limitations to the game's advantage. Also, did you know he apparently didn't have a neck to cut down on polygons? You only have 2 enemies on the screen at once. Oh yes, and the crates and fruit were added to try and fill up the levels that at first playtesters thought were a tad empty. This eventually led to the first few levels that those playtesters played being stripped from the final game entirely. And the Wumpa fruit, simply called apples in Japan, were originally pineapples, strawberries, and at one point limes. And finally, let's not forget the music in the game, which obviously is catchy as all hell, especially considering that originally Universal wanted it to be a mashup of random instruments and noises in a musical style that they dubbed the Urban Chaotic Symphony. I understand what they were going for, but thankfully this didn't happen. So many small design choices like this were made on the lead up to the game's release, but that's because this was intended to be something that it ultimately became: Sony's unofficial mascot. Heck, there was even talks about having Crash Bandicoot theme park rides at Universal. God damn! Sony obviously welcomed Crash with open arms, and even though there was an in-house game being made called Harry Jalapeno to rival the ever-growing in popularity Universal-owned mascot, the game was obviously scrapped, and thankfully fans of this character didn't have to wait too long, as only 1 year later, the sequel was released.
Ooh, wow, that was intense! Woo! I just flew in from the New Ruins level, and boy, are my arms tired. Thank you very much, my man. Thank you very much. That was funny stuff. Wow, funny stuff. Dog, did you see that? Hi, I'm Crash Bandicoot, the super marsupial, the wonder from down under, the rocket with a pocket.
Yeah, the promo was crap, but the game was outstanding. And if you ask me, start with this game, the best game in the series. Taking all those minor issues with the first and perfecting the unique game is what we have here. Development of the game started straight after the first, and the team put some serious man hours into this one. Thankfully, not changing up the style too much, that was already done. This time it was simply all about improving the gameplay, and they did this by completely reworking the game's engine. That is a hell of a lot of work in just 1 year. So what makes this so much better? Well, everything. Everything is improved, even things you don't expect, like the story that pops up in between random levels with the over-the-top cheesy cartoon-style animation and comedy humour of Dr. Neo Cortex brainwashing Crash to help him get more crystals. It's stupid, but it's brilliant, and something that I personally look forward to each time I start this game up. The difficulty in this game, although slightly toned down, is still great fun, and most importantly, still offers a challenge. But thankfully, it's just more forgiving this time round, letting you just enjoy the game for what it is. You know, the best and most refined Crash game ever. The boss battles are far more creative and puzzle based than before, which I prefer. The levels look better, and those running towards the screen levels have never felt more rewarding. If you've never played a Crash game, I highly suggest that this is the game you must play. It's praised so much for a good reason. It's a bloody good game, and an absolute landmark, not in just the PlayStation's library, but in gaming history as a whole. Crash Bandicoot Cortex Strikes Back left me wanting more, and exactly 1 year later to the day, they did it again, releasing Crash Free Warped. The final proper Crash game made by the original team at Naughty Dog, and the best selling game in the series, outselling such great titles as Spyro the Dragon, Banjo and Kazooie, Abe's Exodus, and oh my god, even Sonic Adventure. Now, just like Sonic Adventure, both these games are actually quite good, but nowadays, yeah, they're a bit dated. Still worth looking at, mind you. You're going to have a kick-ass time here, that's for sure. Just expect to get the odd moment of pure frustration as you try out a few of the game's questionable gameplay mix-ups. Thankfully, due to the game's awesome time travel plot twist, the Naughty Dog guys really did get the opportunity to go Crash crazy with the level design. This is by far the wackiest and most diverse entry in the series, possibly ever made. On top of this, after you defeat what are arguably the best bosses in the series, you get an upgrade to help you through some of those later levels' crazy difficult challenges. Overall, at the time, I remember finishing Crash Free, putting down the controller, and like the ultimate half Sega, half Sony brainwashed zombie teenage kid that I was, sat there in amazement as I whispered to myself, that was the greatest game I've ever played. Playing it back now, it's really not. It is still a damn good time. That is fully worth your time. A worthy sequel and finale in the original trilogy that still amazes me that it only took 9 bloody months to make. For me, back in the day, this was the final Crash game I played in a very long time, until I started collecting old school games during the end of the PlayStation 2 and beginning of the PlayStation 3 era. And this was when I eventually got Crash Team Racing.
Step out of the car now, sir.
You're way over the speed limit. You've run 2 guys off the road. You've been throwing green stuff into the path of oncoming vehicles.
Step out of the car now.
We got you on video.
Hey, Murphy, look what I found in the trunk.
How awesome is that trailer? I wish I saw this when I was younger. Maybe I would have bought it at the time. The final Naughty Dog developed Crash Bandicoot game ever made. In fact, it was actually believed that this was actually going to be the 3rd game and started development after my favourite in the series, the 2nd one. However, development got so out of hand with this game that the team decided not to only fulfill the free game contract put forward by Universal, but let them have another one. You've heard all the big YouTubers mention it already, and I'm the same. Crash Team Racing is the greatest kart racer ever made. That was until Mario Kart 8 Deluxe came out. But let's face it, 18 years at the top of the Slopes Game Room kart racing podium? That ain't a bad achievement, I must say. But why is it so good? Well, not only does it do the usual kart racing thing, taking all the classic characters of the franchise based in worlds that are designed on the levels from the previous games, which it does very well, might I add, but the most important thing here is the collecting. This isn't just a spin-off kart racer where you have a throwaway tournament that has no real replayability other than to just do it faster. Yeah, I suppose it has a throwaway story, but it's the collecting that really does make the single player aspect just as fun, if not even more fun than playing the game with 4 players using the multi-tab. You can complete all 4 of these games so far with a good amount of challenge, sure, but it's only us hardcore fans that are going to want to finish it to the end by searching and collecting all of the hidden stuff. It's crazy rewarding, and Crash Team Racing keeps that collectathon style gameplay that made the platformers so bloody great and injected it into a game that at first glance is just your typical spin-off kart racer. This, in my opinion, is why the game is loved so much, and that is why I really hope they give it an awesome revamp like they're doing with the Insane trilogy. You never know, it could end up taking the top spot once again. Now, for some reason, if you do want a crappy spin-off, let me introduce you to Crash Bash. Okay, I suppose it's not too bad. Annoyingly, all these types of games instantly get compared to the obvious better Mario Party series. But honestly, there have been times in history that these party minigame compilations have bettered that Mario Party series. However, Crash Bash is not one of them. There are very few minigames, and you have to play the game a hell of a lot in single player mode before you can play them in multiplayer mode. However, get to that point and what you have is a pretty good game, I suppose. But sadly, just a very short list. Looking back for the first time in a very long time, it's actually not the worst first game for another team to take on. It's just not as good as the game it's trying to copy, and it's most definitely better than the awful 2006 Nintendo DS exclusive Crash Boom Bang, which has gameplay far worse than the majority of party games out there. Yes, even including this. In fact, one reviewer at the time said that this was the worst game on the system. Okay, that's a bit harsh, don't you think? Anyway, that's enough of those crappy party games. Let's go back to the main series, shall we? Wrath of Cortex, the first proper game in the series not developed by Naughty Dog. The first game on the next generation system, and the first game to be a bit of a letdown. Okay, it's really actually not that bad of a game. Back in the day when I briefly played this over a friend's, I gave it the usual 5 minutes play session, didn't like it, turned it off, and put SSX Tricky back on. Playing the game now, however, you know what? It's really not that bad. Don't worry, there's plenty of those in this series. However, there is definite enjoyment hidden here, and Traveller's Tales actually didn't do the worst job, all things considered. Is it anywhere as good as the originals? Hell no, but it most definitely doesn't deserve the hate that it gets. Now, development of the game was actually supposed to be headed up by Mark, but due to a falling out with Universal, his idea of an open world Crash game fell flat, and a 12-month time limit was slapped on the desks of Traveller's Tales. In my opinion, the biggest problem with the game was the expectation. They needed to make something that was way more diverse than the third game, but all those extra things that are not core Bandicoot style levels are 9 times out of 10 pretty poor. Although I really do like those ball sections. Those are pretty good. In the end, what you have is a very average, sort of 6-7 out of 10 game. That, if you are a big fan of the series, you shouldn't have too many problems playing through. But as a newcomer, yeah, I'll be surprised if you get past the first few warp rooms before giving up. Now, Twinsanity, on the other hand, is a game that I have a hell of a lot of fond memories for. the humour was far more wacky than even the first few games, and overall had a silly kiddie Saturday morning cartoon feel about it, which I like. After a get straight to it fight between Crash and Dr. Neo Cortex, which ends up with you rolling down a hill together, most of the time you two are connected. Not in a crappy Knuckles Chaotix or Sonic Heroes type of way, but instead a pretty damn quite ingenious way. Almost single player in fact, and it gives you more moves to play with. Weirdly, when you look at the game as a whole, it doesn't feel like a Crash game at all. And not just because the majority of the game you're in is an open world setting, but it's far more diverse, constantly trying something new, but unlike Wrath of Cortex, and dare I say it Warped, this one gets it right almost all of the time. Crash to Insanity sadly came out during a time of average at best games, and that's a shame because it's a really good game and I had an absolute blast playing it once again. Plus, in regards to the music, which was done by the group Spiral Mouth, an a cappella band, what you got is something totally unique and something that easily stands on its own 2 feet way more than any other game in the whole series. Oh, and by the way, Crash to Insanity 2 was at some stage in development, and apparently it involved Crash being sucked into random TV shows, but sadly this was cancelled. Right, let's deviate from this a little bit and look at a couple more kart racers. We have obviously already had Crash Team Racing, but good old Crash Bandicoot also had Crash Nitro Kart and Crash Tag Team Racing. Okay, so firstly, Nitro Kart. This is actually done by the same guys who recently pumped out the remake and was going under the development title of Crash Team Racing 2. Does it live up to the name? No, so thank God they changed it. However, the game really isn't that bad, getting average scores when it came out. It's a tad generic, nowhere near as good as the game that came out a whole generation before, and overall it's very meh. But what's actually quite surprising is the Game Boy Advance version. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a true hidden gem for the series, and had plenty of glowing reviews when it came out, with one reviewer saying that it could actually rival the Mario Kart as the best kart racer for the handheld. How about that? Plus the game actually has an unlockable Spyro character in it. If that's your thing. Now, looking at Crash Tag Team Racing, this one's actually pretty weird. Would you believe me if I told you this was actually a platformer? Well, it is sometimes. You see, there's this hub world where you choose the levels, and it's a bloody platform game. And it's only when you enter the levels that it turns into a racing game. I have absolutely no idea why they chose this, but I sort of like it, as both types of games are actually quite fun. Okay, the platforming stages get a bit tedious, but the kart racing is actually loads of fun when you eventually get there. And if you're thinking of picking up the PSP version, you probably should think again, as that game has some of the worst loading times I've ever seen. This is a very strange entry in the Crash racing trilogy, but on a whole, it's still a lot of fun. Neither of the two compared to the originals, that's for sure, but I personally had a lot of fun with all three. Right, okay, we're getting through them now, aren't we? What's next? Let's move back to the main series and give Sierra a go with Crash of the Titans. This one I actually owned on the Xbox 360. Completed it, and then for some weird reason got it again bought for me for Christmas for the Wii. Yeah, thanks mum. So, let's get the big gripe out of the way. Crash hasn't got his gloves on anymore, and instead he has these crappy Robbie Williams tattoos on his hands. I was never a fan of this. They look stupid. But honestly, that's really it. So looking at the game compared to the originals, it could potentially be a completely different series. But you know what? I bloody loved it back then. It got mixed reviews, but I found it hard to see why. Apart from the stupid tattoos, that is. But I would be lying to you people if I said I didn't enjoy it. I actually did. And although I didn't play the DS version up until recently, that's actually pretty good too. And the Game Boy Advance version, not so much. So the game is an open world game once again, and this time you collect Mojo, which unlocks extra abilities. pretty much all your standard affair like the iconic Crash spin and all that sort of stuff. However, with every new Crash game you have a new hook, and in this game it's about taking control of the Titans by using Aku Aku, which for some reason looks like this now. Going back to the game for the first time in many years is pretty much just your generic platformer. Even with the Titan takeover, it's very bog standard, but as platformers go, it's actually not a bad one. Perhaps a tad forgettable, but that's really my only gripe, apart from those bloody tattoos, that is. Sierra even had another pop at the franchise with Mind Over Mutant. Yes, yet again with the stupid tattoos. This is basically a sequel to this, and is more of a brawler once again, with platforming being very much an afterthought. Again, I really enjoyed it, especially the cartoon style cutscenes found in between the levels that seem very creative. As you would expect, the game gives Crash even more abilities, and almost all of them feel pretty great to play with. The game got genuinely positive reviews all round, definitely higher than the last game, and it's very much deserved. Although it does have a tad too much backtracking for my liking, plus it is probably a bit too easy, still, it is great just to sit down, switch off and play. Right, now that's actually everything up to this point. A completely varied series of games that completely changed up the gameplay style every few years or so. But would you believe it? We are still not done. Obviously we still have the Insane trilogy to cover, but before we do, let's get the handheld games out of the way. Okay, Crash's Huge Adventure, a Game Boy Advance game that again is surprisingly really quite good. A simple 2D game with elements taken from the first 3 games. It doesn't try to break the mold, and that's a good thing. A simple yet effective 2D action platformer. Crash Bandicoot 2, Entrance, came out a year later, also for the Game Boy Advance, and again is yet another great game for the system. Seriously, where did all these bloody awesome Crash games come from? Okay, this one I suppose I didn't really get into. It's a bit too strange for me, but it actually did get good reviews. It's actually 2 different games where you play as Spyro in Crash's world, and in the other game you play as Crash in Spyro's world. It's just a selection of mini games, an annoying hub world, and for me it's very much a low point for the series. I do go back to this one every so often because the reviews were actually quite good, but I can never get into it. Crash even had a go on mobile devices with Nitro Kart and Nitro Kart 2. Again, another couple of highly reviewed titles, and finally, there was another mobile Java game that also got good reviews and was even praised as a recovery for the series with excellent level design. Bloody hell, you guys still here? Talk about a complete history! That was a hell of a lot of games we covered, and we didn't even go into the crazy amount of failed projects that never really got far into development. But we really do need to stop somewhere. And what better place than right here.
It's Crash Bandicoot!
Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy. My god, what a crazy journey that started with 3 very positively remembered games that you can now play at their absolute very best in full HD, with the sort of graphics that will last a lifetime. If you ask me, playing Crash Bandicoot the Insane Trilogy really did bring back the memories of the old games, which, let's be honest, is exactly what it should have done, and for that I give it a 10 out of 10 rating. What more needs to be said? Want to play those original 3 games at their very best for the PlayStation 1 generation? Yeah? Then don't bother getting those versions, get this version instead. I don't care if that's blasphemous to the hardcore retro players out there. For me, these games are perfect at what they intended to do. But what is possibly even more important, especially for this episode, is that this remake got me interested to go back and check out the rest of the games in the franchise. Everyone says that Crash died after the first 3 games, plus the kart racer. But you know what? I personally think he got it right more often than not. Give the little bugger a break, would ya? Sure, he's been in some stinkers, but more often than not, he's been in some exceptionally bloody good games that I am proud to have in my collection. In short, if the most recent game in the series is your first, then that's fine. But don't stop there. Go off and explore the pretty damn cheap and very misunderstood Crash Bandicoot franchise. You never know, you may actually enjoy yourself. Here's to the inevitable future of Crash, the crazy amounts of relaunches for the series which I feel is about to start again, making this complete history defunct. However, just like so many of my other complete history videos, I welcome it. PlayStation are on a journey to plant the seeds of its history the same way Nintendo do, and they're doing it bloody well. Long live the Bandicoot that was there from the very beginning. Your time to rise once again is now. Wow, there you go. A massive thumbs up to all of you guys that have actually made it this far into the video. Just like the Grand Theft Auto video, if you did make it this far, give yourself a high five down in the comments. This is the Patreon part of the video where I want to say a big thanks to Matthew Ritter, Ryan Burford, Ian A. Chapman, Phil Lowlins, Downright Superb, James Loveridge, Casey Garner, Blitz Hedgie, Ben Hall, Taylor Almond, Team Not Crash, and Tiago Piera dos Santos Silva. If you want to be part of my Patreon list as well as seeing videos like this early, then feel free to click the link that you see on the screen to go and check out my Patreon. It really does help the show. But anyway, this video has been a mammoth task and I am going to bed. So do all the usual stuff, share it on social media, thumbs up, leave a comment and all that jazz. But for now, this is DJ Slope signing out and hopefully I'll see you all next time.